The drive back from Whistler takes about 2 hours on a good night. That night, with the rain coming sideways off the sea to sky, and Brooke half asleep in the passenger seat, it felt longer. She'd taken her boots off somewhere around Squamish. One of them had rolled under my seat. The other was somehow wedged against the center console, which I only noticed because she kept nudging it with her sock-covered foot like she was trying to remember what it was doing there. Her head was tilted toward the window. Every few minutes she'd make a small sound, not quite a word, just that low hum people make when their body has finally given up arguing with them. "Still with me?" I asked, mostly to hear something over the rain. "Mm-hmm," she said. Then, after a pause, "We should have taken the gondola." The gondola had closed 4 hours ago. I didn't point that out. Her name was Brooke Calloway, and she had been one of my closest friends for almost 5 years. We met at a trivia night at a bar on Commercial Drive in Vancouver. She'd been on the opposing team. She'd disputed my answer about the 1972 Summit Series, and she'd been right, which I told her immediately, which apparently surprised her enough that she bought me a pint to celebrate her own victory. That was us. Since then, she'd become the person I texted when something funny happened at work, when something went badly, when I needed someone to tell me whether I was being unreasonable or just tired. She knew how I took my coffee, black in the morning, splash of oat milk in the afternoon, which she said was incoherent, but had stopped questioning. She knew I hated small talk at parties, but showed up anyway because I liked the food. She knew when I was frustrated, I went quiet in a very specific way that was different from my regular quiet. And she'd learned to tell the difference without asking. I knew her too. The way her laugh was always a beat behind when something actually caught her off guard. The way she cleaned when she was anxious. The way she said, "I'm fine," exactly the way people say it when they're cataloging reasons not to be. That weekend had not gone the way either of us planned. It had started well enough. A group of 5, a rented cabin just outside Whistler, one of those long October weekends that feel like the last gift before the coast turns good. Brooke had organized the whole thing. The cabin, the dinners, the specific trail she wanted to hike before the snow hit. She'd been excited about it in the quiet way she got excited about things she'd put real effort into. And then, Friday afternoon, a guy named Spencer arrived. Spencer wasn't supposed to be there. He was a friend of a friend. Someone named Derek had invited him at the last minute, which Derek had mentioned casually on the drive up as though it was nothing. Spencer was tall, worked in finance, had the kind of confident ease that made you feel vaguely evaluated the moment he walked into a room. Brooke had mentioned him once, in passing, 2 months earlier. The way she'd said it, quickly, then moved on, was the way she mentioned things that weren't actually in passing. He spent Saturday skiing with someone else, a woman named Courtney who'd driven up separately and had not been mentioned to anyone, apparently including Spencer's version of his own life. He introduced Courtney at dinner with a hand on her back and the practiced calm of someone who had decided that ease of presentation was a substitute for basic decency. Brooke laughed when he walked in. That controlled laugh people produce when they've been caught off guard and need a second to rearrange. She drank more wine than she usually did at dinner. She stayed cheerful in a way that took visible effort. I stayed close in the way you do when you know someone needs it and doesn't want to ask. By the time we left Sunday morning, the group had fractured into different cars. I ended up driving Brooke. Nobody said anything about it. It was just assumed, the way a lot of things between us had become assumed over 5 years. She was almost asleep by Pemberton. I pulled off the highway to stop for gas outside of Squamish. The rain had eased slightly. Brooke stirred when I cut the engine. "Are we back?" she asked. "Gas. Stop." "Oh." She looked out the window at the station lights. "I'll come in." "You don't have to. I want chips." She was already reaching for her boot. Inside, she spent 4 minutes selecting chips with the focus of someone making a serious decision. She landed on the salt and vinegar, then stood in line behind me while I paid, then leaned one shoulder against mine, the whole drive back, without seeming to notice she was doing it. That was Brooke. She moved toward the people she trusted without thinking about it. Like a reflex, she'd stopped examining. It was close to midnight when I pulled up in front of her parents' house in East Van. She still stayed there sometimes when she had an early start or just didn't want to be alone in her apartment across the city. Her family had lived in that house since she was 8. The porch light came on before I'd even finished parking. "You don't have to walk me in," she said. "I know. I got out anyway." She was a little unsteady going up the front path, not dangerously, just the soft imprecision of someone who'd had a bit too much wine and a bit too much of a weekend. I stayed a half step behind without making it obvious. The door opened before she reached the top step. Her dad, Frank Calloway, was standing in the doorway in a flannel shirt and reading glasses pushed up on his head, which meant he'd been waiting up. He looked at Brooke, assessed, did the math, then looked at me. "Hey, Reed," he said. "Hey, Frank. Sorry for the late one." He stepped back to let us in. Brooke kicked off her remaining boot and padded toward the stairs. I started to follow to say goodnight, but Frank put a hand on my arm, lightly, just enough to slow me down. Brooke kept going, not noticing. He looked at me for a second. Then he said, in the low, unhurried way of a man who had been watching something for a long time and had decided tonight was the right moment. "You know she turns down plans when you're not going to be there." I went still. Frank wasn't looking at me for a reaction. He was looking somewhere past my shoulder, toward the stairs, the way fathers look at something they've been paying quiet attention to for longer than anyone realized. "I probably shouldn't have said that," he added, not sounding sorry. "No, it's—" I stopped. "I just don't know what to do with that." He gave me a look that said he thought I probably did, then stepped back toward the kitchen. "She'll sleep better in her own room. You don't have to go anywhere." I stood in the hallway for a moment. Then I went upstairs. Brooke was sitting on the edge of her bed, still in her jacket, looking at the floor with the expression of someone doing a slow inventory of every decision made in the last 48 hours. "Hey," I said from the doorway. She looked up. "You came up. Your dad told me to stay." She almost smiled. "He likes you better than he likes most of my choices. I like him for that." She pulled her jacket off and dropped it on the chair. I leaned against the doorframe, and for a minute we just stayed like that. The rain had started again. Soft, the way it gets after midnight in October. "He seemed unbothered," Brooke said finally. "Spencer. The whole dinner. Like it was nothing. He wasn't worth the weekend you planned." She nodded once, not like she believed it, like she was filing it for later. Then she looked at me and said, "Can I tell you something that I'll probably deny saying tomorrow?" "Sure." She folded her hands in her lap and looked down at them. "The whole drive up, I kept thinking about how things would be if you were there instead of Spencer. And then I hated myself for it. Because that's not fair to anyone. Not to him, not to whatever I was trying to give a chance." She paused. "And definitely not to you. I didn't move. I've been doing that for a while," she continued quieter. "That comparison thing. And it started to feel like—" She stopped and pressed her lips together. "Like I've been measuring every room by whether it feels like the ones you're in." That one sat in the air for a second. There are sentences you hear and immediately understand will stay with you, not because they're dramatic, because they're accurate. That was one of them. "Brooke," I started. She shook her head once. "I know. It's a lot. You don't have to do anything with it. I'm not looking for an exit." She looked up. I don't want to get this wrong," I said carefully. "Not tonight." She searched my face. Then she nodded, slowly. "Okay." Her mom appeared in the doorway behind me then, Carol Calloway in a housecoat, carrying a glass of water and 2 Advil, which was so exactly right that I almost laughed. "Brooke," she said, with the measured efficiency of a mother who had clearly been briefed by the man downstairs. "Drink this. Both of you look like you need tea." 15 minutes later, I was sitting at the kitchen table with Carol across from me, the same table I'd eaten Christmas dinner at twice, the same table Brooke had done her taxes on last spring, with a glass of wine and a spreadsheet, and a series of increasingly creative swear words. The rain was loud against the back window. The overhead light was off, just the under-cabinet strip above the stove, the way it always was late at night. Carol set a mug in front of me and sat down. "She doesn't bring people here," she said without preamble. "Not often. She has her own apartment, her own life. She doesn't need this house anymore." She wrapped both hands around her own mug, "But she's here about twice a month, and she usually calls before she comes." She looked at me. "She calls more when she's seen you recently." I looked at the table. "I'm not trying to pressure you into anything," Carol said. "I'm her mother. I want to know if my daughter is going to wake up tomorrow and feel humiliated." I set my mug down. Then I told her the truth, Because it was 1 a.m. and the kitchen felt honest and I was out of reasons to be careful. No, I said. You should be worried that I've been trying to find the right time to say the same thing for about a year. Carol was quiet for a moment. Then she exhaled, long and slow, the way people do when something they'd been carrying finally puts itself down. Frank thought it was obvious, she said. I told him obvious isn't the same as said. He's right and so are you. She smiled into her tea. She's going to overanalyze this in the morning, I know. She'll decide she's said too much. She'll try to walk it back with a joke. I know that too. Carol looked at me over the rim of her mug with the frank assessment of a woman who had been watching this for a while and had her own opinion about how long it had taken. Frank offered you the couch once, 3 years ago. You never took it. I didn't want to overstay. You've never overstayed in this house. She stood and picked up both mugs to refill them. Guest room's the second door. Towels in the closet. There's leftover salmon chowder if you want something before bed. I'm fine. You're staying, though. It wasn't a question. Yeah, I said. I'm staying. I lay in the guest room for a long time after that, fully dressed, looking at the ceiling while the rain came and went in waves. The house made the sounds old houses make, the click of the baseboard heaters, the creak of someone turning over upstairs, the refrigerator doing whatever refrigerators do at 2 a.m. I thought about the first time Brooke called me from a parking lot because she'd gotten bad news about a job and didn't know who else to call. I thought about the time she showed up at my apartment during the heat dome summer, with a Costco fan under her arm because she'd remembered I didn't own one. I thought about every man she'd mentioned in the last 5 years, the ones I'd been careful not to have opinions about, the ones I'd pretended to be neutral about. I hadn't been neutral, not for a long time. Sometime around 2:30, I heard the floor creak in the hall. Then a pause outside my door. A quiet knock. I was up before it finished. Brooke was standing in the hallway in a gray UBC hoodie and bare feet, hair in a loose knot, looking at me with the specific expression of someone who has been awake for an hour, rehearsing something and still doesn't feel ready. Hi, she said. Hi, I remembered more. She crossed her arms. Not defensive, more like bracing, what I said. Upstairs, okay. How bad was it? It wasn't bad. She exhaled through her nose. Raid, I mean it. It wasn't bad. She looked at me for a second. The hallway was dim, just the nightlight at the end by the bathroom, orange and faint. I said the comparison thing, didn't I? Like a complete person. You said it, yeah. She closed her eyes briefly, okay. And I said the room thing. The room thing, about rooms feeling different depending on. She stopped. Yes, that. You said it. She looked at me with something close to despair. I'm a grown adult. You are. I have a master's degree, environmental studies. Yeah, and I apparently confessed my entire, she made a vague gesture, situation to you, in front of my childhood bedroom, while mildly wine compromised. I stepped into the hallway and pulled the door mostly closed behind me. Brooke, I'm serious. You can just forget I said it. We can go back to, I'm not going to forget you said it. She went quiet. And I don't want to go back, I said. She looked at me carefully the way she did when she was deciding whether to believe something that seemed too convenient to be true. You're saying that because it's the middle of the night and you're in my parents' house. I'm saying it because it's true, and I've been not saying it for about a year. Something shifted in her expression, not fully, like she was waiting for the part where it stopped being true. You stayed, she said suddenly, quietly. Your dad suggested it. My dad suggests things all the time. You don't have to take the suggestion. She was looking at me the way you look at something when you're trying to figure out if it's real. You stayed. I wasn't going to leave and let you wake up thinking you'd said something wrong. She stood very still for a second. Then she said, in a voice that had lost most of its armor, Did I? No. Then what did I say? I looked at her. The orange nightlight, the old carpet runner, the family photos along the wall I'd walked past 100 times. You said the truest thing, I said. You just said it first. Brooke uncrossed her arms slowly. That's a very composed answer for 2:30 in the morning. I've had longer to think about how to say it than you have. She considered that. You've had longer. Significantly. She looked down at the hallway floor, then back up. Her voice was quieter now, not fragile, just careful in the way she got when something mattered and she'd stopped pretending it didn't. How long? Long enough that it started feeling like the background, I said. Like I'd adjusted to it. Told myself staying quiet was the right call, that I was being respectful of what we had. I paused. Then you'd mention someone you were seeing, and I'd go home and be in a terrible mood and call it something else. She laughed once, short and involuntary, and pressed a hand over her mouth. Then she said, "That is an embarrassingly familiar experience." Is it? I thought I was being so subtle. You were not subtle. I thought I was, Brooke. You rearranged your schedule twice this summer to avoid doubling up your plans with mine so they wouldn't conflict. Her eyes went slightly wide. You noticed that. I noticed everything. That's the whole problem. She was quiet for a second. Then she said, "So what are we doing?" The hallway was completely still. The rain had stopped. Even the house had gone quiet the way old houses do around 3 a.m., like the whole building had decided to mind its own business. "I'd like to take you for dinner," I said. Properly. Not as the person who drove you home from a cabin weekend gone sideways. On purpose, next weekend somewhere neither of us has to be anywhere after. She looked at me for a long time. Properly, she repeated. Yes, not as a save, not as anything except what it is. She nodded once, slowly, and something in her face came loose. Not dramatically, just a quiet shift, like she'd been holding a specific kind of tension for a while and had just decided to put it down. "Okay," she said. "Yeah? Yeah." A small smile. "But I need you to know that my mother is going to be completely insufferable about this." "Your mother has been insufferable about it since before either of us admitted there was a this." "She really has." Brooke shook her head, fond and resigned. Then she reached out and straightened the collar of my jacket in that easy, automatic way she had. Just a small adjustment, no big deal, the kind of thing you only do with people you've stopped being careful around. "Raid! Yeah! Thank you for staying. Always." She looked at me for one more second. Then she rose up slightly and kissed me on the cheek, and before I could do anything with that, she stepped back and said, "That's collateral. You get the real one when I'm not standing in my parents' hallway at 2:30 in the morning, and my dad is definitely awake listening from behind the door." From down the hall, muffled but unmistakable, "I'm not listening." Brooke covered her face with one hand. "Good night, Dad. Good night, Reed. Good night, Frank." A pause, then, "Good kid." Brooke looked at me with the expression of someone who has accepted that dignity is not available to them in this house. I was already laughing. She shook her head, pressed her lips together to keep from doing the same, and disappeared back toward her room. I stood in the hallway for a while after that. The nightlight buzzed faintly. One of the family photos on the wall showed Brooke at about 12 in a winter coat, standing outside what I recognized as the Capilano suspension bridge, making a face at the camera that was so distinctly her, I didn't know what to do with it. I went back to the guest room and fell asleep easier than I expected. The following Saturday, I picked her up at her apartment in Kitsilano at 6:30. She'd suggested the restaurant, a small place on Main Street, the kind with exposed brick, and a wine list that doesn't try too hard. She was waiting outside when I pulled up, in a rust-colored jacket I hadn't seen before, and she looked up when she heard my car, and something in her expression did the exact thing it always did, and this time neither of us pretended not to notice. Dinner lasted 3 hours. We didn't talk about Spencer. We didn't talk about the cabin. We talked about everything we'd always talked about, and it was the same and completely different in the way things only are, once you've finally stopped pretending there's nothing to say. Walking back to the car after, she took my hand without making anything of it, just reached over and laced her fingers through mine like it was a thing she'd been doing for years. Which, in some ways it had been. Her mother texted her before we'd made it half a block. "Did he pay?" Brooke showed me the screen. I laughed. She typed back, "Yes, 3 dots. Then, finally. A month later, she still stole fries off my plate. I still drove when it rained because she hated the highway at night. The only real difference was that, when we walked into parties together and someone asked how we knew each other, neither of us said just friends anymore. And yes, Frank remains exactly as smug as he's earned the right to be. What would you have done if you drove someone home on a bad night and her father quietly told you she turns down plans when you're not going to be there? Have you ever had a moment where someone said the thing you'd been holding on to for years before you found the nerve to say it first? Tell me in the comments. If this one got you, Leave a like and subscribe to Whispered Almost. I'll see you in the next one.